and welcome to another World of UX podcast. This is your host, Darren Hood. Thanks, everybody, for taking the time to join us on today, as always. And also, as always, welcome to those of you listening to the show for the first time. We are in the midst of our anniversary celebration, which I am going to let you know today, it is going to be extended. We are scheduling some additional interviews, and so we're going to go well outside of May with these. We're going to go into June. And so just looking forward to some great, energetic, and informative conversations with different leaders from within the UX community. So I'm going to go solo today. And some people might think of this show as a bit of a potpourri, but I want to specify something with this episode. And this episode is specifically based on several interactions, some favorable, some not so favorable, some informative, some not so informative, but just some things that we need to be aware of in the community. You can almost think of this one as somewhat of an extension of the Sinister series just because of what I'm going to be covering. But we're in a bad way. And I'm really thankful today for more people that are starting to recognize this, more people that are starting to take the bull by the horns and address what's going on, to objectively speak out about some of the things that are happening, because it's not until more people join in and more people recognize that this thing is going to get straightened out. I've had some people ask me recently, do you think we have any hope in UX today? And I'll say, do we have hope? Yeah, we do. But it's going to take a lot more than what's going on today. And that's what brings the topic of today's show to mind. The topic of today's show is simply say no to the Kool-aid. Say no. There used to be a saying with certain people in charge from a political perspective in the United States. We have a lot of global listeners, and other people might be aware of this as well. But there was a campaign. It was called "Say No to Drugs." It didn't work. It was really politics within the politics for the most part, but I won't get into that today. But I'm sort of borrowing from that mentality. I hope that this works. That it's not until you put things on people's radar that they're going to start paying attention. It's not until you really specify what's going on and the associated consequences of having apathy towards it that you start to make impact. And whereas it didn't work at large, I mean, things got worse with the topic at hand back in the 90s, I believe it was, where that came up. But there were some people who did benefit from it. And the more people that do benefit from things being called out, the better off we're going to be. So let's go down the list. I've got a list, again, of some things that I want to call out. Some of these things were based on some interactions that I had, some things that people said, some things that were directed at me, some things that were directed at people that were parallel with me. But we need to really call out the Kool-aid. Now, first and foremost, because everybody won't know, what do we mean when we say Kool-aid? And I've had some people get really pedantic about Kool-aid because this is, the story is that this concept of Kool-aid has to do with people who were involved in a cult. There was a cult-oriented experience that took place in the United States. Of course, those situations are always bad. And there were a group of people who ended up, without getting into too much detail and becoming overly morbid with this, but you can't help but present the morbid side of it. And it's sort of good that we are talking about morbidity, because what's happening in UX is morbid as well. There are things that are happening to our detriment. Until we start to address it and call it out, we're not going to make any progress. There were a lot of deaths associated with it. And these people all drank something that resulted in them losing their lives. And we'll try to limit the morbidity that I'm presenting to that. But the reality is that it happened. It really happened. And some people get pedantic about it because they say, well, they didn't drink Kool-Aid, but the reports were that they did. And so that's where the metaphor came into play. The reason I call out the pedantic nature of some of the comments is that people say, hey, it wasn't Kool-Aid. People died. I don't care what they drank. I don't care what they did. They all followed somebody at face value. Some of them didn't. Some of them were forced to do it. And people are being forced to, quote unquote, drink Kool-Aid in UX today, too. People are being intimidated, just like they were in that particular situation. And you want to look it up? Look it up. It had to do with something called Jonestown. If you look that up, go to Wikipedia. I'm sure there's a lot of information about what happened in Jonestown some decades ago in the United States. But the thing was that they drank it, they died. So the metaphor is that people are partaking of something, whether they're doing it willingly or whether they're being coerced into doing it. The bottom line, which is why being pedantic doesn't benefit anybody, or in other words, being anal retentive about the thing. The bottom line is that everybody who partook of that liquid substance lost their lives. And so we need to be aware that Kool-Aid, we're all on the same page now. When you know what we mean when we say Kool-Aid, if you want to be pedantic, you can be pedantic to move on, and people are dying around you regardless of what you're choosing to call it. So let's not try to really, how's the phrase go? Don't be so narrow-minded that you miss the message. That's basically what we're trying to get at here. It's really critical. So I hope people will understand that on today. At any rate, let's take a look at some of these Kool-Aid oriented things that are happening in hopes that people will wake up. There might only be a handful of people that do right now, but we really need to start making progress. So let's get down the list, shall we? Number one, a lot of people, there's Kool-Aid in the UX community that they think that everything we do, I talked about this during a recent series, that everything we do revolves around portfolios when it comes to hiring, when it comes to identifying, engaging talent, assessing talent, that it's all about portfolios. People are so portfolio minded that they've forgotten about resumes. They've forgotten about being qualified. They've forgotten about, or just don't even care about, other things that are far more important than what's in a portfolio. And they actually end up missing the message. But what's really bad and what's really more dangerous about this portfolio thing is that everything now, a lot of things I should say, that are happening in UX circles are all geared toward things that are actually more important to those that are just entering the discipline, to the extent that you go to a meetup and everybody's talking about new UXer stuff. You see posts on social media, the vast majority of what's being posted is all about new UXer stuff. Everybody's focusing on and spending time speaking about what's going on with new UXers, to the extent that what's really the real factors associated with the discipline are being overlooked. They have been pushed into the background. They are being ignored. And now the things that really matter don't exist. And I said this recently, to the extent that people who are just learning about UX, and a lot of people are, and I'm talking about stakeholders and clients, I'm talking about leadership, they hear this stuff so much that the real, the grit, our actual, the core factors associated with UX, they're starting to think that that's what UX really is. That's another reason why aesthetics are at the forefront so much these days. Portfolios, all this kind of stuff. And how should I do my portfolio? Should I have a case study? How many should I have? All this other stuff. That's for people that are just getting into the discipline. And so the value system is what this comes down to. The value system of what UX is about has been relegated to what new UXers find valuable, and what's truly valuable is completely overlooked. That's Kool-Aid. It simply isn't true. And if we're going to keep UX in its rightful place, if we're going to restore UX to its prior and proper value proposition, then, hey, portfolios have a place. They're a necessary evil. There was a wonderful post that came out recently that said that we need to be focused on the skills and the qualifications of the candidates, not just a portfolio. And the portfolio does not it barely scratches the surface with regard to what a person is bringing to the table. You cannot hire a person just by what's in their portfolio. Do they know how to communicate with people? Do they know how to collaborate with people? The portfolio isn't showing that. It really isn't. It isn't showing that at all. The vast majority of what we do revolves around soft skills, not around hard skills. Does the portfolio demonstrate that? No, it doesn't. And so portfolios are it's a really sad piece of currency that people are dedicating themselves to. And do you need a portfolio? Because hear me right. Do you need a portfolio in this day and time? Unfortunately, yes. But a lot of great positions, the best jobs I've ever had, did not require a portfolio to get the job. That says something. The getting jobs at creative agencies back in the day, nobody wanted to see your portfolio. They didn't even care. They wanted to know what you brought to the table when it came to qualifications. Again, which portfolios don't necessarily show. And in addition to all of the things I just mentioned, I've talked about these before. Here we go again. I know. But it's really sad that people are being reduced to what's in a portfolio when there's so much more that demonstrates what a person brings to the table than what's in a portfolio. So we need to get out of the Kool-aid mindset associated with portfolio. Point number 2, I had an interaction with somebody recently, and I may have even talked about this on a recent episode, but somebody was talking, they were trying to have a conversation, and the person said, UX just became important over the last 10 years. Now, even though I brought this up before, and I think I'm going to touch on something I didn't if I did speak about this before. Number one, that mindset is completely inaccurate. And what's worse is that person didn't deduce that on their own. They heard it from somebody else. This gets back to the issues of massive misinformation in UX. UX has been around since the late 90s. It started to enter the mainstream. Wasn't called UX then, so don't want to hear one of these anal retentive people who said, "What are you talking about? You've been doing UX." Somebody actually said this to me once. "You've been doing UX for 28 years. UX wasn't even around 28 years ago." And I always say it wasn't called UX when we started doing it. And so people will try to focus on something. They're being extremely picayune. They are being anal retentive, again, being pedantic. And if you've been around, you know that it wasn't called UX, even though Don Norman had the title UX in his job title back in about 93 or 94 or so. It wasn't called UX at large until more than a decade later. We already know this. So trying to bring that up in an attempt to find fault with somebody, people doing that are groping for straws. And this pedantic mindset feeds into the Kool-Aid because a lot of the Kool-Aid people are pedantic, but we'll deal with that a different time. When the person said UX has just become important over the last 10 years, again, it's showing how people who don't know anything about the discipline, people who really have a short history in the discipline, and I'm not demonizing that. If you have a short history, you have a short history. More power to you, and I hope you continue to grow and continue to press forward. This is not the issue. The issue is there are a lot of people who limit what UX is to what their exposure has been. And if they've only been around for 3 years, 5 years, 8 years, 10 years, and think that runs the gamut of what UX is, that is grossly inaccurate. And this is another reason why I always say folks need to know about the history of the discipline. And if you don't know about the history of the discipline and trying to be an influencer or trying to have a voice or trying to quote unquote put yourself out there, that's unethical because there's a lot of things you're going to miss. And then there's a lot of new people who think you know what you're talking about when the truth of the matter is they don't. And that's where Kool-Aid starts to gain momentum or starts to be reinforced as being something that is valid. It's not. If you partake of that Kool-Aid, all it renders is a lot of consequences instead of benefits. And I think we all want benefits and not consequences. Another issue, I keep coming across people who, when you say something about what UX is, what it should be, I keep coming across people who their response is, well, companies are doing X. Companies are saying Y. Companies are hiring for such and such a role with such and such a job title. And they're speaking as if companies are setting the bar. Companies don't set the bar for UX. What a company does, what it's hiring for, who they have in charge of their UX departments are all reflections of what their UX maturity levels are. And you even have people today coming at UX maturity saying that it's not a valid means of measuring anything and we shouldn't be doing it. That's really gross. That's really trying to blow up something that's a standard within the discipline. And if you blow up a standard, what are you going to replace it with? More anarchy? So that's a really poor proposition. That's an amateurish set of proposition, and it's not wise, it's not prudent, it's not good, it's not beneficial, it's extremely harmful, it's extremely detrimental to the discipline. We simply can't do that. UX maturity is critical, and companies are showing you that they lack maturity or are not paying attention to it at all when they're trying to dictate things to you about UX, trying to ignore something that already exists. They're ignoring the ISO standards. Do you know there are ISO standards associated with user experience, user-centered design? People need to be paying attention to those things. That's part of the history. That's part of where we've come from. It determines where we should be going instead of embracing these things that have been used to override what we were taught and what we learned in the past. I'm going to talk about that again in a little bit. But when companies are hiring for something, they're hiring a UX designer. What do you mean? There's no such thing as UX UI. No, the companies don't know what they're talking about. That's just it. I mean, it's just a fact, and nobody's going to override it, and it can't be overridden just because the majority, which doesn't understand or really respect the discipline, let's call it what it is, or let's just say enough people, just because enough people think that it should be or we should be doing what companies say, this is not democratic. The definition of UX is not democratic. It's something that was already determined before the vast majority of us got involved. So we need to recognize what existed and then go forward from there. So companies do not dictate what UX is. That is all Kool-aid, and we're going to have to embrace that. I heard a presentation recently, and this came from another person who's supposedly a leader in the discipline. Matter of fact, they are viewed as a leader in the discipline, and they said something else. They said a few dangerous things, and it just keeps getting worse. I don't know where this stuff is coming from. I don't know why this person keeps trying to suggest this, other than the fact that they're going to end up making money off of it. Do you know some people are monetizing Kool-aid? That's not the way they're going to express it to you, but that's what they're actually doing. So someone is saying that, UX research should start taking the reins. They should start leading the efforts of UX teams. Well, first and foremost, research, if in a perfect world, which God knows, and we know we don't live in a perfect world when it comes to doing UX work. We're constantly getting on the train late. We're not there at the beginning. We don't know what's going on. People come to us and try to get us to make sense of things that they've already done that don't make sense. It's a battle. That's why a lot of overly sensitive people, neurotic people, don't really do well when it comes to UX, because a lot of things happening over here, they're not going to be done right. And we have to try to bring value amongst people who don't understand who we are, don't understand what we do. And we have to try to bring value and try to show that we need to be here with all types of things working against us. That's a challenge in and of itself. So it doesn't work for the neurotic, because hypersensitive people are going to always find offense and always they have a sense of entitlement, and they always want things to be handled a certain way, and it's just not going to work that way. But at any rate, in a perfect world, research is going to be done first. There's going to be a lot of formative activities that take place to help us understand where we're going and what we're doing. We understand that. But is that an absolute? And especially when you have people who will say that we cannot do, if you're doing research, you can't do design. If you're doing design, you can't do research. Please think about that before you embrace that. That's a Kool-aid oriented statement as well. Remember, prior to 2011, we were all doing design and we were all doing research. And not only were we all doing design and all doing research, we were knocking the ball out the park, to use that metaphor. We were doing great work. We didn't start seeing a decline in the quality of UX work until specializations came along. Did you know that? We all did the same work, and we would put on the research hat, we would take it off, we would put on the design hat, then you had to put the research hat back on, and then you had a strategy hat on in between. We were doing everything. So to say that designers can't do research and researchers can't do design is not true. It's not accurate. It's not historically sound either. Today, with a lot of the specializations, a lot of the researchers can do design and a lot of the designers can't do research, failing to understand if you were being educated properly, you would be learning how to do everything. So even if you did go and do a specialization, even if you did go and focus on research later, you still understand enough about design to inform, to collaborate, and push come to shove, to even do the research and vice versa. So we need to understand that if we keep going down this road of specialization where people are not well versed across the different aspects of UX, that's going to create some really severe problems later, problems that folks don't want to spend their budgets getting resolved. So please know, if people keep coming up with ideas and don't understand what it's going to look like if that thing succeeds 5-10 years down the road, that is a losing proposition on several counts. At any rate, but back to what the person suggested. The person suggested that we start letting the researchers run the show for UX. I find it interesting for several reasons, with a couple of them I'm going to bring up here. One, a lot of academics, a lot of people have come out of the world of academia into UX, not because they love UX, not because they respect the discipline, not because they understand the discipline, because they heard that it's easy to do, because the paycheck, the starting salaries for a lot of UX roles, a lot of times either are already above what they're making in academia or quickly rise to be above what they get in academia. So a lot of those people, hey, just telling you like it is, a lot of academics came into UX for all the wrong reasons. So now, and they have taken a lot of these roles. So now these people coming in and taking on the roles, a lot of people are going to be angry at me with this, but if you're angry about truth, that's an EQ problem. So I'm not taking back what I'm saying. I'm not going to kowtow. I'm not going to be politically correct. I'm not going to coddle anybody. These things are true. These things are happening. And if you are humble enough and emotionally intelligent enough to face the truth, you know that what I'm saying is true. If these people, because these are the people who took on a lot of these roles, now you're proposing, when that person said this, when they proposed this, they're proposing something that's already worse, that's already happened. We've already had a lot of unqualified people head UX departments. Now you want more unqualified people who are even less qualified than the people who got the other roles to start calling the shots in UX. And again, that person's doing it because they've monetized it. They stand to make 6 figures off of it. I mean, a solid, matter of fact, probably millions, way more than 6 figures, because they keep bringing in the $20,000 contract, the $50,000 contract, the $75,000 contract, because people believe this stuff, because they served up Kool-aid and somebody drank it. They did the same thing figuratively that happened in those situations where they drank the Kool-aid, either because they were coerced or because they did not go through critical thinking, ironically, an academic mindset to prove that this is the direction that we should go. So not a good idea. It's Kool-aid. And for those of you that did get into the discipline for the wrong reasons, You got to double back. I'm not saying you have to get out. I'm not putting you out. I'm not suggesting you leave or anything of the sort. But I will suggest that you go back and learn to develop a respect for the discipline, learn the history again of the discipline, develop a mindset that is more understanding of what this discipline is about, and then you can salvage, and then you can build, and then you can go in the right direction. But to come over here to chase the money, to chase prestige, to chase ease, all wrong reasons. Shouldn't do it, can't do it, not a good thing. So we want to make sure that we know and understand that today. Another interaction I had with somebody, and it was really sad because I said this recently. It's sad how people who just got into the discipline and in the midst of their discourse will admit that they just got into the discipline, will turn around and question. And should people who have more experience than you be questioned? There's a time to do it. A lot of us welcome it. I welcome it. It's not going to fare well when you're engaging like that with people who have a lot of integrity and have high levels of ethics, because we do things for the right reasons. And so you're not going to be able to question us on a consistent basis and have that be successful. And some people question because they're anarchical. Some people question because they have no respect for authority. People forget about that. A lot of people had no authority figures in their lives, actually grew up, whether it was parents, uncles, aunts, grandmothers, grandfathers, whoever. A lot of people came up where practically every person in authority in their lives was a complete, sheer, and utter jerk, frankly. People who were not to be respected, people who were not to be followed, people who could not be trusted. And so they developed this and crystallized a sense of cynicism that every time they come across somebody who's in authority, who should be regarded, who should be listened to, who can be trusted, they're so cynical that they just automatically default to cynicism, and then they just fight against anything. They always want to fight against the system. Well, everybody's not like that, and you're not doing yourself a favor, and you certainly aren't doing the discipline a favor when you have that kind of mindset. So there's these people, they always want to fight, they always want to scratch, they always want to kick, they always want to scream. Just got into discipline yesterday, figuratively, and so they just automatically start fighting instead of, wow, I can learn a lot from you. Hey, thanks for taking the time. And then you get the people that barge in, they don't know you from Adam, as we say, and their first interaction with you is to hit you with some AI-generated flattery and then ask you for stuff. That's stupid. It's rude. It's obnoxious. It's disrespectful, and folks shouldn't be going that route. But at any rate, I had an interaction with somebody, and in the midst of all of this fluff, and they had no idea that everything they said came out of Kool-aid. They had no idea whatsoever. There's one thing that person said that stood out to me, and there was actually a few people who were saying some of the same stuff. But one of the people said, they mentioned ADP list, and they said ADP list has a lot of great mentors. And that stood out to me, not because I don't support ADP list, and I don't. I have no regard for ADP lists whatsoever. Not only because you can get what ADP list is offering you through other sources without the consequences, but ADP list, I've been trolled by ADP lists. I've seen them troll other people, and I don't have any respect for organizations or entities that subscribe to trolling. So, and I'll say that's on record. I've got all the evidence, and so am I slandering something? Nope, I'm not. It's true. The people at the top, they troll. They trolled me. I have screenshots of things they've done. It's not a good look. It's not a good thing. And I've said before, and I say it again, you can't troll somebody who stands for the well-being of the discipline, and then you yourself be an entity, a trusted entity for the discipline. That's contradictory. So that's why, if you ever wanted to know why I'm of that mindset, that's why. But this is what stood out to me about what this person said. The person just statement after statement, sentence after sentence, was disavowing. They claimed that they disagreed with what I said, but you can't disagree until you understand it. And you can't understand a fact and stand against it. So when somebody disagrees with a fact, it lets you know that there's a problem. There's a critical thinking problem. There's an emotional intelligence problem. There's a respect problem. There's an ethical problem. So when a person says that they have a lot of great mentors, how is it that you can come across quote unquote great mentors, but then hear something substantive and not subscribe to it, not understand it, not embrace it? Do you know that's impossible to do that? People are what they produce. If you're interacting with great mentors, and please know and understand, I know some people that mentor for ADP. They're gonna like want to punch me in the arm for what I'm saying, but they can't deny it either. That you can have great mentors. Again, I know a few that they're just great UXers, and they function as mentors on that platform. And the platform, remember, I said they are trolls. So the trolls are using people who are reputable to build their brand. When the mentors are greater in reputation and ethics than the brand, that is a problem. That means that some of the mentors are more reliable than the brand. An ADP list is not a reliable source. And nobody can deny what I'm saying. ADP lists approve some people. I just use this one factoid. ADP lists approves some people to be mentors that do not meet their own requirements. Why have the requirements if you aren't going to use them to choose who and who not to approve? So they don't even eat their own dog food. So that's again, I don't have respect for them because of that. But if these mentors were so great, why do the people who subscribe to and embrace these mentors have such grief and disdain for people that are saying things like what I'm saying? They should be embracing everything I'm saying because they shouldn't know it to be true. So because you are what you produce, and people who are over there, she says they are so great. They have so many great mentors, but you can't embrace what I'm saying, then those mentors didn't teach you what I'm teaching you. There's a problem there. And please understand, the fact that they have some good mentors does not override the fact that they have issues, major issues, issues that actually make them to not be trusted. So just know and understand that today. So yeah, ADP List is a Kool-aid based entity. They are a Kool-aid based entity, and I won't take that back. There are other mentor resources out there that can be trustworthy, more trustworthy, I should say. But basically, the best mentor and mentee relationships all happen organically. And if you don't have a mentor at your job, you're missing out. You shouldn't have to go outside your job to get mentoring. And I stand by that today. So, and then lastly, before we get to our closing points, I was engaging with somebody and they said, they heard me say pure UX, and they took umbrage to my usage of the phrase pure UX. Now, let me say something about that to make sure we're all clear, all on the same page. The only reason I mention pure UX is because I'm trying to contrast something, because everybody who says UX today is not talking about UX. Hence, we need to differentiate. So there is pure UX, and there's what I call the cult of UX. I've mentioned that before on this show multiple times. Pure UX, and there's the cult of UX. The cult of UX is, as with the metaphor that I'm using in this show with regard to the Kool-Aid, pure UX does not include any Kool-Aid oriented factors, elements, philosophies, whatever terms you throw in there. When it comes to those same things on the cult of UX side, they're full of it. They're replete with those things. And they are diametrically opposed to everything that's happening in pure UX. So there has to be a differentiation. And when we're talking, when I call out pure UX, I'm trying to, again, bring up the contrast so people understand. I'm trying to communicate effectively. So now that's the end of that. This person said, according to your definition of pure UX, which they didn't hear me define, and I didn't define it in the post where they saw it, and I'm sure they didn't go back and listen to my content to see it. So They were just picking that out and making an issue of it, number one. Again, you cannot disagree with what you do not understand. And folks you're disavowing when you do that. But it wasn't the fact that they called out pure UX. It was the fact that they made it subjective. They implied subjectivity and they said it was my definition. That is where you start to see the gaslighting come into play on that, because I learned UX by reading about Rosenfeld book, by reading the Polar Bear book with Lou Rosenfeld, Peter Morville, Peter Arango, by reading their books, my guests from last week, by reading Susan Weinschenk and the things that she was teaching, by reading about Richard Saul Wurman and what he was teaching about information architecture, by reading Alan Cooper's books, by reading about Jeffrey Zine, by reading about Kelly Goto. It's what was learned, what Jesse James Garrett presented, what these people taught us in the late 90s, the early 2000s, Jacob Nielsen, Don Norman, all of these people, the things that they were teaching, the principles, Christina Watke, the things that these people were teaching and presenting that we came to know as UX. That is what I mean when I say pure UX. It's the principles that we were taught in the beginning. Nathan Shedroff, the principles we were taught in the beginning, the things that were collectively, because we didn't have disagreements about what UX was in 2006. That stuff didn't start until 2011, 2012, 2013, when the siege against UX began, when people who didn't want to learn all that stuff and kept trying to rebrand UX into something that it's not. When the cult of UX began to take root, when people began to lie to get UX roles instead of working to become qualified. This is the issue. This is what the cult of UX is. This is where the differentiation is. So when a person said, according to your definition, they tried to imply that what I was presenting as pure UX was something other than what other people were talking about back in that day. I steadfastly adhere to what I was taught and what I learned back in the day. That person who said that, they didn't learn what I learned. Matter of fact, a lot of the people who serve as detractors against the things I present on this show and the things I talk about when I'm out and about on the circuit, speaking at different places, those people are usually, and I also said this in a prior show, those are usually former art directors, former creative directors, or current art and creative directors, former developers, people who didn't operate in UX, people who didn't have the background, people who didn't learn those things, people who don't know half of the people I just mentioned, some of those pioneers of the discipline. These are the detractors. So when they try to make it personal, they're trying to decide. I presented a point of contrast, and they're presenting a point of false contrast. So if we're going to understand UX for what it really is, it needs to be understood from that perspective today. This is not personal. This is not what Darren Hood decided. This is what Darren Hood learned, and other people learned the same thing. And that's where you have the line in the sand between the pure UXer and the cult of UXer today. Who's subscribing to what? And make sure that you understand that, and make sure you go back and understand the historical aspects of UX so you can be a pure UX practitioner, because the other people, they're going to eventually be exposed. And I'm hoping you're not going to be one of them. So all that said, our closing points. I just explained, in a sense, when I talk about the siege of UX, and I just mentioned that a few moments ago, I just explained what the siege against UX is. And it's Kool-aid against drinking, quote unquote, drinking something that's not going to hurt you. Make sure you're choosing the right things. I mentioned earlier, folks are trying to turn UX into something that it's not. And when they do that, they're offering up Kool-aid, and the people who refuse to engage in critical thinking are going to opt in. Not good. If you're embracing something and discovering that what you were embracing is not accurate, all you have to do is own up to that error. We've all done it at some point in time, at some areas of our life, if not in UX. Just own up to the error, pivot and move on. No big deal. No harm, no foul, go forward. And I'm thankful for many people who have done that today. I'm thankful for you. everybody I engaged with who felt like that didn't maintain that. Some people overcome it. Some people thanked me for what I shared. They're thankful that somebody turned the light bulb on in their life. You can make the same change. Not a problem. Know and understand that maintaining a commitment to something that's inaccurate does harm to you, does harm to your teams, harm to your users, and harm to the discipline overall. Let's not dwell there. And I also alluded to this. This is an EQ-oriented factor. As soon as somebody with lower EQ, or at least lower EQ in the moment, as soon as they hear something that contradicts the dictates of their anchoring bias, when you have an EQ red flag at work, they will revolt against what they hear. And they will even turn around and try to attack the source. They want to attack the mailman when all I'm doing is sharing facts. So that's not a good look. It's not going to help. The person that has higher EQ considers what's being said, they evaluate what's being said, critical thinking, and they arrive at a proper conclusion, the benefits, the offspring of, the product of critical thinking. So good stuff. So folks, the Kool-aid era that we're in right now, it needs to end. The associated gaslighting needs to end. And the attempts to cancel people who are speaking the truth about these things also needs to end. Folks, just say no to the Kool-aid and we will all be better off. Wouldn't it be great if we got back to the mindset where all the UXers were in alignment in 2008 and 2009 and 2010, where we could go to conferences and you didn't have to worry about what somebody was going to share because they weren't sharing any misinformation at a conference in 2008? Wouldn't it be great if we could all come together and just have conversations and we could vault ourselves forward with every social media post instead of people bickering and screaming and kicking and trying to make somebody look bad? This kind of thing, not good. Say no to the Kool-aid, and the more people that do, the better off we'll all be. So that's all the time we have for today, folks. We are going to close out here. So thanks for taking the time to listen in on the show today. And I'm going to make a plea because there are people, some people actually try to come against the show by trying to give us a bad rating. They get angry about what we're saying and they give a bad rating. Game knows game, folks. If you love the show, if you appreciate what we do on the show, please give us a rating that reflects how you feel about the show, because we don't have a lot of ratings. We have a lot of people that listen, but we don't have a lot of people who bother to take the time to give a rating. So asking you to give us a rating today. If you love the show, please give us 4 or 5 stars, or whatever the highest number of stars is, usually 5. Please give us 5 stars. Help us out on the show from that perspective. We truly appreciate it. But until next time, it is time to sign off. So this is Darren Hood, the host of the World of UX, wishing everyone all the best as always. Until next time, happy UXing, everybody.